The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to a discussion with Claudia Bepko and Joanne Krestan, co-authors of Singing at the Top of Our Lungs. I'm Cindy Linus, host of the show today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy.
I'm intrigued with your book, Singing at the Top of Our Lungs. How did you come with the name, Singing at the Top of Our Lungs?
Well, we had such an incredibly inspiring experience. We talked with over 300 women in the course of writing the book, and one day we were driving along in the car and I was trying to think of an image that would most capture the sense of aliveness and passion and power of these women, and suddenly I saw singing. And of course it had to be at the top of our lungs because I wanted to convey that women are finally going to be heard. And so it's an image of joyfulness, exuberance, passion.
And it's about women.
And it's
really
about women.
Women's
Right.
lives.
Right.
Yes.
What brought you to research and surveying 300 women? What were you asking them?
Well, we started actually by asking women questions like, tell us your first love story. And do you remember your first love? And asking women what passions they had set aside, what happened to their first love. And then we asked them what talent they had set aside. Had they ever dreamed of singing on Broadway or dancing or painting or quilting? And we began to make connections between love and creativity.
And when you say creativity, one of the things that I stumbled over often was creativity. My mind of what creativity was different than what you were defining it in the book.
Yes, of course, when you use the term creativity, everybody thinks you mean artistic talent, and we don't mean that at all. We're really talking about the power to have access to one's inner life, the power to express what's deep inside. And all women have that. Surprisingly, when we talk to women, they don't think they're creative. But we were to prove, I think, through the course of our work that all women have creative passions. And the trick is to unearth them from where we have hidden them away.
You talk about the smiling woman. Is that part of the unearthing?
Yes.
Well, actually, that's part of what you have to get out from under. The metaphor of the smiling woman came to stand for the image of women portrayed in the cultural narrative that was really perhaps most predominant in the 40s and 50s, but still affects people even really of your generation, Cynthia. The idea of the Mona Lisa smile, sort of fixed and plastic. The smiling woman is the woman who interrupts what she's talking about when a man comes in the room because she's sure to bring him into the conversation. The smiling woman is the object, not the subject of her own life story. She's the beloved, not the lover. The muse, not the writer. The art object, not the artist. So, getting back to what Claudia was saying about creativity, creativity is also a way of looking at the world and a way of really being the author of one's own life story rather than the object. For example, one of the women said at one point in thinking about love, gee, I never asked, was John the man for me? I only asked, was I the woman for him?
Amazing, isn't it?
Yes. It
But
really
fairly
is.
common, I suspect.
Yes, absolutely. And we were concerned, we wanted to talk about love and creativity together because women really believe that their identity is to be lovers, but lovers, as Joanne was saying, in a more passive sense. They're
caretakers.
They're caretakers. They're responsive. They're nurturing. They're not generative. We're taught that only men go out and create in the larger world, and women kind of stay home hidden in the privacy of the home. And that there's a kind of false split, a kind of either or that gets set up in women's minds. Either I can be relational or I can go out into the world of work, but I can't do both, or at least I can't do it well. And we wanted to explore how women could overcome that split and how they do overcome it.
So then it becomes an integration.
That's right.
So that's what you're talking to. And you put people into, or I don't know if you put people into, but in your research it appears that there's 4 categories that you found that women tended to be in. What are those?
Well, actually, when we say categories, they're not so much categories as descriptions of the shape of a woman's life. And the shape of a woman's life is determined by her life circumstances, but also what her predominant energies are. And the 4 categories we came up with are fluid, they overlap. Women may be characterized by one or the other at different points in their lives, but we call them lovers, leaders, innovators, and artists.
Okay, and those are, let's describe those a little bit.
Okay, well, the lover, these are categories that are kind of on a continuum, from women who are very highly relational in their energy to women who are highly creative in their energy. And on the one extreme, the is the woman for whom relationship is a primary passion. In our interviews, lovers would say things like, relationship is it, or I would never give up, sacrifice my relationships with my family and children for any other priority, any other interest. These are women who are very satisfied and fulfilled by being focused on the needs of other people.
And yet they're also the most disappointed in their love stories, which was curious.
Interesting.
The research indicated that they were both most fulfilled and most disappointed, perhaps had the highest expectations.
Yes, it's a very complex category, because often women get into it out of faithfulness to their social conditioning, out of the need to be a smiling woman, or the tendency to be a smiling woman. And it's very important that a woman in this category knows that she's doing this out of choice, and not because she feels she has to conform to social expectations.
She's been
For example, one of the stories in the Lovers chapter, we contrast 2 women, both of whom are in their 60s, both of whom are writers. One is writing a book on Chinese literature, and the other has just established, as of next week, a 900 number called Movie Link that you can call for capsule movie reviews. She writes for the Village Voice. Both were at college in the late 40s, both married. The first woman really, she didn't know, neither one knew they had a choice. And the first one, Joan, describes it. She was at Vassar. She was passionately involved with ideas. She married a man who was at Yale. They went to the dean of Yale, and the dean said, you may marry him if you give up Vassar and move to New Haven and make a home. And she literally described not turning over in bed at night, but lying awake for fear of disturbing the sleep of this important man who was entrusted to her for safekeeping. But she loved the first act of her life. She was able to channel her creative energies into building his business with him and to having children. The second woman was one of the very first women in children. One of the first women in television. She married a man who worked for her. He's a wonderful guy. She's still married to him. The first one, by the way, is divorced after a happy marriage. The second one is still very happily married, but she couldn't stay in television. There were no fax machines in 1950. And she was told, as so many women were, they had fertility problems, so she was told to quit work and stay home and relax, and then she'd have a child. And she took a long detour into addiction. And it was after her recovery that she was to reclaim her creativity. And yet many women today are still choosing the lover pattern, and the important thing is whether it's a choice, whether it's a fit, not even a choice, whether it's a fit for your energies.
I want to come back to that addiction issue too, after we talk about the other categories.
Well, let me just make a point about that addiction issue briefly, that's one of the reasons why we feel this book is so important. If women don't reclaim their creativity, if they don't reclaim parts of themselves that they've put away or haven't accessed, they become numb and they become deadened, and they're very likely to slip into addiction or into some other way of managing a lot of feeling and energy that they haven't been able to express. So
in fact, we live in a culture, Cynthia, that devalues feelings. And I think part of what we see, and I'm very aware that we're doing television today, but part of what we see in daytime television is a reaching for further and further extremes of feeling and sensation, almost as an antidote to a culture that is somewhat deadened to authenticity.
So anyway, the lover category is, as I said, on the one extreme of the continuum, the woman passionately engaged with relationship. That doesn't mean this woman doesn't work or have a career or have creative activity, but her creative activities may be ones that can easily be fit into the life of a family.
Like quilting, that you can put down and take up again. A creative activity that will tolerate living an interrupted life.
As one of the quilters that we mentioned says, she had to find a medium that she could fit into her baby's schedule. Okay, after she had her first child. The second category is what we call the leader category. This is a woman who is also very relational, highly relational, but who also has a passion for work or career. But she's a woman who takes her love of relatedness and connection and uses it in her work. It becomes a part of her work. So the skills that she learns as someone who is very relational, she translates into her work life. She may become a therapist, a healer of some sort, a doctor, a nurse. She may work in public relations. She's a people person. And we call her the leader to suggest that she can move people to connect with one another, to also experience the satisfaction of relational connection. In the book, we talk about two women who are colleagues of ours, actually, who are family therapists. Monica McGoldrick is a well-known family therapist who has written several books, who travels all over the world and presents all over the world. And as we described it, she flies in and out of airports like most of us drop in at the dry cleaners. And yet, if you talk to Monica, as we did, what you learn is that what she values most in life is relationship. What she thinks of as most important are the connections that people have with one another. She's recently had a child. Well, it's not so recent anymore. I guess her son...
But she had her first child at 40.
Yes.
Okay.
He's about 5 or 6 now. And she says that what matters after all is said and done is the quality of the connections that people have with one another. And
so she gave up, for example, Russian studies and embraced family therapy, because Russian studies was leading her deeper and deeper into the recesses of the library, whereas family systems ideas moved her out in dialogue with people. But both were intellectual passion. And what she says about family therapy is it's Dostoevsky just translated.
Interesting.
And she is very much known for her capacity to bring people together in the field, students with mentors. She does a lot of mentoring herself. So that's the kind of energy of the leader. The woman who cares passionately about the world, tries to move out into the world to help or make things better for others.
Maybe a woman who does not work for money outside the home, but who does volunteer work. It could be the woman we interviewed in Portland, Maine, who just celebrated her 90th birthday publicly, but was in her 80s when she founded the AIDS Coalition and did that as a volunteer activity, took her own pain and took it forth into the public arena to do great good for the community.
So none of these categories are necessarily dividing the traditional roles that are part of the culture?
Well,
and
just one, the artist.
Okay.
The artist, and let me talk about that, because just as the lover is at the extreme of high relational energy, the artist is at the extreme of high creative energy, and this is the category that is least traditional.
Okay.
This is the category of woman, or not category, this is the shape a woman's life might take that would make her most vulnerable to criticism. Criticism such as you're selfish, because to be an artist, and an artist can be a corporate lawyer, doesn't have to mean painting. But an artist, a person with high creative energy who really must follow their inner vision and put it out there and join with the world in that way, is really somebody who's capable of great single-mindedness and clarity of purpose. And we use, as a matter of fact, the story that opens the artist chapter is the story of the artist whose painting was adapted for the cover of Singing at the Top of Our Lungs. And I'd like to show you, Cynthia, just one slide of another of her paintings now. It's called A Self Tree. She's a New York artist. And the tree, as you can see, has many branches, each of which ends with the word self. But it depicts to some degree, and I think she'd agree with this, Claudia, the somewhat difficult path she followed. Because she was in her 30s, she had young children, and she decided she wanted not to be a Sunday painter, she didn't want to make little pictures. She wanted to be a painter, but she was married to a man who wanted to be a very important politician. And that was clearly going to divide her energies, because he was a big subject of his own big life. And she went through a very painful divorce. She really wanted to make the marriage work, but she could not fit that in. And she studied the lives of George O'Keeffe and Katharine Hepburn because they were women who took up space. And then she noticed the men who were in her painting class. And she noticed that they seemed to feel entitled to go out and buy lots of paint and huge canvases, and they managed to paint large. And she noticed that O'Keeffe wore only black, not to distract herself with those other choices. And so she developed a highly single-minded vision of who she was going to be. But the artist pays a relational price unless she has a form of relatedness that fits for her. And again, the cultural narrative has told us that we only have available to us this ridiculous Doris Day image from the 40s and 50s, the smiling woman, which really doesn't fit for our modern lives at all. I mean, it really, truly does not.
Causes some conflict, I suspect.
It causes tremendous conflict. It doesn't work very well for men. We know it doesn't work very well for children, but we're still trying to squash our energies into that outmoded form. And if Kathy, as she has now, is in relationship with a partner who's very important to her, but whose work is also primary, so that they have evolved a more parallel structure and supportive structure, she can have both relationship and art. There are other women, like the art critic Lucy Lepard, whom we also interviewed, a feminist art critic, who have had relationships somewhat sequentially, and her relational energies go mostly to her community of friends and to her son, but not to a primary relationship. But then there are women who are at the creative end of the spectrum, whom we call innovators. And the difference between them and leaders is more like, if a leader is a physician, she's probably a physician because she's compassionate about people and wants to heal them. If an innovator is a physician, she's probably a physician because she's curious about what went wrong in the body. She's interested in the scientific aspect. The leader will not go to her professional convention if her kid's first day of kindergarten is that day. The innovator will go with the kid in a backpack. One of our innovators, Linda Russell, we just had a wonderful letter from her last week. She is an actress and a balladeer, and I guess we rightly put her in the innovator chapter because we haven't been in touch in months. And she just wrote us that she had in fact had her first baby 5 days after her Carnegie Hall debut.
Oh my goodness.
So that is innovative to do that. A well-known commercial artist was a great example of an innovator, and maybe we could see her slide. This particular one is called Viva Matisse, and she's known for her vibrant use of color, and maybe you can share a little of her story.
Well, Sarah had been known that she was artistic and had a lot of creative energy from the beginning. As a child, she felt very different from her friends at school, and she had an extraordinary sensitivity to color. In fact, one day, not too long ago, she said to her mother, "Whatever happened to that burgundy dress I wore when I was 2 years old?" And her mother said, "Well, how would you remember the color of that dress? We didn't have color snapshots then." And she said, "Well, I remember it because I wore it." And she, more than most people, and this is true very often for innovators or highly creative women, that they have strong visual memories of their childhoods. And anyway, Sarah was very talented and knew it from the time she was a young child, but her goal was always to become a wife and a mother. And she thought to herself, my husband will distinguish me. So when she ultimately married, and as her career began to build and she became more and more successful, her husband decided that they would move out of Phoenix, where she was working at the time, and had been offered a very high-paying job, in fact, and he was going to take a small civil service job that had really no future, but he became very threatened by her success. And this was an example of the way now she was being very innovative in terms of balancing having her children, who she would put in a little playpen in her studio and paint while they drew, you know, on their own little pads that she would give them. Or she would schedule their feedings at 2, 8, and 10 in the morning or something.
Much more routine and
right.
much more, this is how it'll be done.
And she would paint in between feedings. And that is what we mean by innovating. The woman is determined to balance the relational aspects of her life with her creative energies. But eventually she outgrew the marriage because her husband could not be flexible enough to tolerate her creative energy, essentially. And she's now married to a man who she has a much more egalitarian relationship with, who we interviewed Sarah at 10:30 at night. And I can remember that in the middle of the interview she called him, or he called her and said, "How you doing? How's everything going? Are you okay?" And she said, "Fine." And she would be there in the studio, she told us, probably till 3 in the morning. And that wouldn't
very
be
dedicated, very focused.
And that would not
Very
be a
focused.
problem in that relationship, because she had found a partner who could adapt the form, his expectations, to the form that she needed for her career.
And evolved the form that fit for her life, which has to do not just with relationship, it has to do with knowing the rhythms of your own time. For example, when Claudia is writing, and I think people always ask us about our collaboration and our different process, and this is our 3rd book together, so we've given it a lot of thought, believe me. But she needs great chunks of time. I need to avoid the computer. I need what I call meander time. I need to feed the cat and walk the dog, make 5 phone calls, eat something, drink a cup of coffee, go out, pull a few weeds from the garden. Sort of I have to circle around the task like I'm circling the quarry, you know, and that's all part of my process. So finding the form that fits involves knowing things like that about yourself too.
And becoming
so that you're
okay
not
with
dead.
it.
That's right, and
Absolutely.
accepting your own process. This is really all about identifying what's going on inside you and accepting it and making a commitment to really expressing it and making it a part of your life.
What do you think has changed for women? I mean, how much different is it now after you've interviewed these 300 women who have made, some who have made changes, some who have not, to be integrated, so to speak? What's different right now than it was 20 years ago?
Well, some things are very, very different, and some things are very much the same. In fact, what surprised us was that the highest percentage of women in our research were still very much lovers. They were still buying into the notion that what makes life most meaningful is relationship, in the sense of a very traditional kind of smiling woman.
On the other
choice.
hand, there was a contradiction in the data, because although these same women checked love as the thing that made their life most meaningful, when asked what made them feel most intensely alive and engaged, many of those same women said a creative interest and did not necessarily notice the discrepancy. So I think it's extremely important to be aware that women experience themselves in a way that is compliant with the cultural story about how they're supposed to feel. And they don't always even know something's amiss until you ask them what they've put away.
And so we haven't changed that much when it comes
don't
to that.
think so.
The struggle.
Well, there is something, younger women, we find, coming out of college or whatnot, are telling themselves that they have to avoid relationship. They don't want to get waylaid by love, because now we are told that we have to go out there and achieve and be super women. And so many women are so focused on career that they're really fearful of love. And what we're trying to say here is that it doesn't have to be an either or.
That society
situation,
perpetuates that idea of the split.
We have to be very careful not to get caught up in the social constructions about what love means, about what creativity, success, achievement, fulfillment means. It's really critical that we be individuals and that we know what our own passions are
and that
follow
our
them.
standards are more standards we set and not
That's
what the
right.
society sets.
That's right.
What kind of advice now do you give to to women or to our society in general, after hearing all this research, where are we heading with all of this?
Well, I do a form of guerrilla warfare, actually, Cynthia. I run a men's therapy group, and I've done so for 8 years. And that's what I say to society. I figure I'll go right where the power is and be a subversive. And actually, I find that a very exciting clinical interest and a tremendous experience. I learn a lot from the men in therapy with me, and find that many younger men, and even men in their 60s and 70s, really want to join the solution and work for the solution. And I'm very heartened by that. But in terms of advice, I think therapy is a terrible way to make a living sometimes, I shouldn't really say this. I hope none of my clients come to Minneapolis and see your show, or I won't be able to pay the mortgage. But the fact of the matter is, we are our own best advisors if we can get in touch with our hearts. And what we're really talking about is being in touch with our hearts. One of our chapters is called The Early Death of Love, or I Used to Play the Violin. And why we put those two things together in the title is that we found that often the blocks to love and the blocks to creativity are the same blocks. Like we were talking about recovery before. Women sometimes use art to go beyond recovery and to really transform their experience and reach out. There's a marvelous woman on the Cape who has a video out now and a show that's traveled the country called Survivors. Christina Hopkins, she's a photographer. She had sort of a transformational moment in Chartres Cathedral. And she started by doing photography with her son. And one day she took a picture of him holding his lamp. And it's a tremendously vulnerable, kind of picture. But she then started photographing the survivors of a sexual abuse group. And in fact, we have a slide of hers that maybe is behind me as I'm talking even now, that shows a woman pushing open a door. And we just really found that women also have to be in touch with what blocks passion.
And that's really what this is about, singing at the top of our lungs, is opening those doors.
Yes.
And this can be gotten at the bookstores, I presume. Came out in 1993.
That's right.
It's been out about 2 weeks.
Okay, in July of 1993.
Right.
Thank you much, and I wish you lots of luck as you continue to help women.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us, and listen again to a discussion with.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.